Hey, Michael and Jennifer, it's Chris McGann. Happy Wednesday. Sending over options for refinancing to finance the home improvements that you hope to do. On my screen, I have three options. Two of them are cash out refis where we pay off your existing mortgage and increase the loan amount so that you get cash back. The third option is a HELOC option where we take out a new HELOC to finance the home improvements. Now, the main takeaway with this is that all these are good options and your rates stay in the low threes, which are illustrated on my screen in front of us. However, there is one clear option, or one option that's clearly better than the other two. But ultimately, the deciding factor is how quickly you need the cash. If the goal is to do the refinance in the coming month in order to get cash to start the work before the year is over, then options 1 or 2, where we have a cash out refinance, now, or a HELOC now, is going to be the option that we would want to pursue. One thing to note: this doesn't get you $108,000 cash back. It gets you closer to $55,000. My software system isn't smart enough to pick up that you've got a current HELOC with a balance of $55,000 that we would have to pay off. So keep that in mind when looking at these options. The HELOC option is going to get you less cash back than what's illustrated on the screen. We could certainly increase the HELOC if you wanted to. We could go much higher than $110,000 if you wanted to. It's just a matter of what you need. Now, the difference between these cash out options is really comes down to timing, as I mentioned earlier a few minutes ago. What I mean by that is, in the coming month, probably early to mid-November, the Federal Housing Finance Authority, FHFA for short, is going to announce an increase in loan limits for California and every state for that matter. Currently, $548,000 is the limit we can go to and have it be a conforming loan. When we go over that loan amount of $548,000, it becomes a more expensive loan because it's considered high balance. What that translates to is the interest rate's approximately 0.25% higher. So if we wait 5 weeks to close the refinance, then we could potentially increase our loan amount to $598,000. And I'm expecting that the new limit is going to increase from $548,000 somewhere to the $590,000 to $620,000 range, meaning that we could start the loan application now. We could submit it to the lender. I'll confirm this, that things aren't going to be date sensitive, because we could certainly get the application in now, start the process, and wait until the loan limits are announced, the loan limit increases are announced. Then we could tell the lender, hey, we'd like to change the loan amount, increase it, and that allows us to get the lowest interest rate option, and we only do a refinance once. And what I mean by only do a refinance once is that if we go with the HELOC option, where we do the HELOC, we close the HELOC in the next 60 days, you guys get access to your funds, you do the renovations, and then we look at doing a cash out refinance in the future, it's more expensive simply because we're doing 2 transactions versus 1. So a HELOC, the closing costs are going to be approximately $1,800 to $2,000 in closing costs, versus a refinance. A one-time refinance cost is going to have approximately $3,000. So if we do a HELOC and then a refinance, we're looking at $4,900 to $5,000, whereas if we just do a refinance, we're looking at, call it $3,000. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, I mentioned a rate of 3.125 is approximately what the rate could be for a cash out refinance if we're doing a conforming loan limit. And just to reiterate, we're expecting the conforming limit to increase from $548,000 up to, say, $598,000. And one thing I wanted to share with you or point out is that it's likely that we could potentially do a cash out refinance and not have to have a appraisal done. In the past, we've had success getting an appraisal waiver on your house when we did a refinance. On the screen in front of us is, of course, your address, and this is one lender that we work with, and they have this cool little widget on their website where you put in an address and it gives you a range for the value of your home. And this range and valuation is determined by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac sales data. So this number of 802,661, I don't want to proclaim it as scripture, but more often than not, when we put this value into Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac's website, they say, yes, we agree with that value. We would not need to have a loan or an appraisal done. So it's possible that if we go with this third option and wait to refinance, we could get an appraisal waiver and not have to even have an appraisal done, which lowers our closing costs another $500. So the main takeaway here is that if you don't need the cash sooner than later, in the next, call it 6 to 8 weeks, we can look at doing a cash out refinance with a higher loan amount to get you the necessary funds you need, and it's going to be the least expensive option. I'll send you a link to this report because, as you can see on the right hand side, it increases your monthly payment the least amount. Obviously it's within $9 or $10 of the home equity line, but one thing to keep in mind is the home equity line is a rate of 5.99, and that rate increases. You can see here at 5.99, that rate is only going to increase in the future. I shouldn't say only, it could stay the same, but the Federal Reserve last week announced or suggested that they plan to raise short-term rates at the end of 2022 or sometime in 2023. So Michael, you and I had a conversation 2 weeks ago, and I said I'm not really concerned about short-term rates increasing in the next 12 to 18 months, and I still feel that way. But last week was a big week in our world because they announced that they're going to start tapering the purchases of mortgage-backed securities. And the ultimate result of that is we saw mortgage-backed securities, i.e. mortgage rates, get worse. On my screen in front of us, these red lines mean rates are getting worse. And it's been a direct reaction to the Federal Reserve announcing, like, hey, we're ready. We've had all the conditions met in order to pull back on our investment in the economy, specifically mortgage-backed securities. Now, I don't say that to say, hey, we need to act now, because if we don't do it now, in a month, things are going to get worse. That meeting, press conference that was had last week was the warning shot across the bow, the signal to the investment world that it's going to happen, and these movements lower, or rather these movements to a worsening, all have resulted in mortgages getting this tapering getting priced in to mortgage rates. So I don't anticipate, and I'm not going to proclaim to know the future, but I don't anticipate that we're going to see any huge movements like this. And I don't use the word huge lightly, because this is a significant movement in our world. Because if you zoom out, you can see for the last, call it, 6 months, we've had a lot of sideways movement. And then it's been, the last week, it's been downward, 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 meaning rates getting worse, worse, worse. And that's directly correlated to the Federal Reserve press conference last week. So all of that to say, I don't think we're in a situation where there's sand running out of the hourglass and we've got to act in the next week or 2 weeks in order to lock in a low rate. I think that we're going to be in a sideways range for the next 30 to 60 days, maybe even longer, because the Federal Reserve has been transparent about what they expect to do. Now, one thing that could impact things that is completely out of our control is Congress and the debt ceiling. They do have sand running out of their hourglass. They've got about 2 weeks to come to some agreement to increase the debt ceiling. before they default on any payments. And really, it's even shorter than that, because I feel like the runway is a really short one, and they've got to come to some agreement before the week's over so that they can avoid a government shutdown. That's with the government spending plan. The debt ceiling, they have, I think, until the 18th. So they've got enough money in savings to go until mid-October before they default on any debt payments. And defaulting on debt payments is going to result in bad stuff for interest rates, i.e. Investors are going to go away from securities such as mortgage-backed securities and treasury bonds and look to put their money elsewhere if they don't, because securities such as mortgage-backed securities and treasury bonds are looked at as the safe investment in the investment world, because you can't lose. But if the Federal Reserve, or rather the federal government, defaults on payments, that doesn't seem like a very safe investment if you have the risk of default. So I tell you all of that to say that's completely out of our control, and we really can't let that influence our decision too much. But if you're incredibly risk adverse, I would say our best option is to look at starting the cash out refinance now. It's the most expensive option because has the highest rate. But if you're in a position where you say, hey, we're willing to wait, we're in a position where we can look at starting things in 6 weeks, then I would say this option of waiting until loan limits increasing happens, and have that be the way that we proceed. So I'll send you this video as well as an email now, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.